talk about that world. It's a world that certainly Trump supporters, quite rightly, uh, then repulsed by and responded to. So you have this kind of virtue signaling and moral posturing by the very people who are, um, you know, making sure you go bankrupt because you can't pay your medical bills.
Yeah. Well, I
Can you please help me to move it?
I'm sorry?
Can you help me to move?
One of
To
those.
the-
One of those.
Huh?
programs.
Can you help me to move?
Oh, yes. This,
Sorry.
no, it's okay.
Or had just published my first book,
Yeah.
which was about India.
I've covered
Where I
it.
did a correspondent. And I get this kind of out of the blue thing saying,
Yeah.
you've been nominated to be a fellow of the athletes. And interestingly, I was actually nominated by a guy who was a fellow, but he was a Chinese business executive who would like a column I wrote in the New York Times about how the American elite didn't quite understand.
Please, how do you remove this?
The way they were running the country was actually making.
I've turned the camera.
Appealing.
Huh?
How do you remove this? I've turned the camera.
Oh, it's a, here.
My beginning with it was actually this guy saying,
Oh.
maybe you all need to listen to somebody who's a little bit different from your consensus. And this fellowship was like, you go to Aspen in Colorado, beautiful mountain town, where parkas are like $3,000 in the local store. And you'd go there for a few days and you'd just, you'd actually read these ancient texts and Plato and Aristotle, you discuss society. And I think they probably wanted some variety when they were choosing me. So I give them credit for that. And I very much was that variety. Right? I sat in a room and with 20 people who read these books and thought, what is a good society? And it was interesting to me because I hadn't, when am I otherwise going to sit with 20 mostly business people and actually in private off the record, like understand what they actually think, how they actually understand the world. It was very illuminating. And 4 years later into it, there was an annual reunion of these fellows from all the different classes. And they asked me to give a talk at this reunion. And a lot of people from the thing gave a talk at one thing or another. It was pretty common. And they asked me to give a talk actually about a hate crime after 9/11. So I said yeah, and then I decided to not inform them that I would be giving a different talk. And I wrote a different talk. And I wrote a talk about what I call the Aspen consensus, which is that you should do good, that powerful and privileged and fortunate people should be able to do good, but never to do more good, but never to do less harm. That they should be told to change the world, but never to change the system. Right?
You did your highbrow, sir?
To give back.
You did your highbrow?
Yes.
That's so cute.
Thank you.
And
I rushed when I did
I
them.
basically said, look,
Really? Oh no, that's so cute.
Thank
well, what
you.
actually better place is reining in the power of I got a weird combination of a standing ovation and very icy stares. Let's say the standing ovation is not for everybody. Some people, even people in that world, were moved by it, maybe even altered by it a little bit. A lot of people thought it was a very asshole thing to do. Some people thought both at the same time and told me that. But what I was trying to get at is I think the heart of what you're raising, which is this group of this modern corporate elite in this country is really built today in a way that I think is different from a generation ago on this fantasy of doing well by doing good. Right? In the book I call it win-winism. This idea is win-winism. And it's really different from prior flavors of capitalism, which in a way were more self-confident in saying the purpose of business is just do business, the rest takes care of itself. This is not quite that, right? This is saying business and the tools of business, and in some cases the spoils of business, are the most powerful possible tool to deal with the biggest societal problems we have. So it's not just that let things trickle down. It's like the way to solve gender inequality is through Silicon Valley tech companies. The way to solve the environment is through Tesla. The way to solve poverty in Africa is MasterCard and Goldman Sachs figuring out like credit cards for rural people in Kenya. It was a really, in a way, new ideology about the capacity of business, not just to deliver goods and services efficiently, which was always the old pitch, and create abundance, but to actually do the work traditionally that even business people thought of as government's work or the civil society's work. This was a kind of almost, I would say, cancerous idea that business and capitalism had to endlessly multiply so that it was almost the only organ left in society, that social change would now be delivered by these same people, mentalities, frameworks, and resources, that education would now be another of their provinces, that gender equality would be kind of fought through their organs and mechanisms. And it's a very seductive idea because at the very moment that big business had been kind of elbowing its way into social change, it had been starving and defanging government, as you know so well.
Well, you point out in the book that they're utterly dismissive of any other way to affect social change, including, of course, government, and therefore they dismantle and destroy systems that are essentially, that they see in competition, or perhaps in their view are inefficient.
But what's interesting is it's a you know, historically it was a kind of phased process, right? So you go back to the 1981 Reagan budget, tax cuts, spending cuts, and
summer's wrapping up and life is picking back up. Early mornings, long days, and a to-do list that doesn't quit. And neither should you. Who has time to slow down due to body pain? That's why there's Aleve, to keep you going. With just one pill, Aleve delivers longer-lasting body pain relief per dose compared to other leading OTC branded pain relievers. Aleve helps keep you moving from sunup to sundown with up to 12 hours of pain relief per dose, so you can keep moving and be ready for whatever's next. Use as directed.
and you know, there were more after that. What you first do, what this group of people first did, a lot of people kind of date the phenomenon I'm talking about to roughly around then. What you first do is you gut government, right? So you cut taxes, now there's just less money for them to spend. You say, oh, you gotta cut spending because there's not enough money in the coffers, even though you're the one who just did that. So now there's less money to spend. So now there's, you know, programs get cut. And which programs get cut? The ones for the people most despised, most disregarded, most unacceptable. So now those programs are cut. So then what happens? Well, the consequences start to take shape, right? You cut food aid programs, shock of all shocks, some people become more hungry. You cut education, and some people become less educated and struggle from that. You cut, you know, mental health facilities, and more people are struggling with that on the street. And then, what a lot of members of this class in ensuing years had the gall to do was sort of metaphorically walk around their society and be like, oh my gosh, what a shame. So many mentally ill people on the street. Oh my gosh, what a shame. American educational attainment so low compared to Finland. Oh my gosh, what a shame. People going hungry in this country. And look, government has failed us. And no one would call them out on the fact that their companies, they're often sometimes the same exact people, have of course pushed for the government to pull back in ways that cause that misery. No. So now they are pointing to the failures of government, failures they helped engineer, as evidence for why government cannot be entrusted with the solution of public problems, thus leaving only them, the private sector, to solve, step in. The phrase that is used in this world is fill the gap. Fill the gap. Fill the gap that they just got done carving.
I want to ask you, you talk about it, there's this absurd reductionism that they use. So they, this is from your book. Jonathan Haidt, professor of psychology at York University's Business School and a popular TED speaker, I once debated him at the 92nd Street Y, was a left-wing student at Yale in the 1980s. He's since turned against the kind of power-busting world change he believed in then. He articulated the new belief well in an interview with a radio host, Krista Tippett. And this is him. People our age grew up expecting that the point of civic engagement is to be active, so we can make the government fix civil rights or something. We've got to make government do something. And young people have grown up never seeing the government do anything except turn the lights off now and then. And so their activism is not going to be to get the government to do things. It's going to be to invent some app, some way of solving problems separately, and that's going to work. You call these people thought leaders. It's like Thomas Friedman saying we should all be entrepreneurs in our garage after mass layoffs. But talk about that.
Can I just say, to bring readers up to speed, we all know Jonathan Haidt, he may have said that then. That may have been what was convenient for him to say then. Jonathan Haidt has since gone on, in the endless reinventions of this thought leader class, to become a big entrepreneur of the idea that phones are dangerous for young people, and he's made a persuasive case that they're doing a lot of damage to young people. So now it seems Jonathan Haidt does not think that apps are going to solve things for young people. Now what Jonathan Haidt is doing, if you followed his work, is calling for governments to deal with phone access for young people. So it's quite interesting that the guy who said government's not going to do anything, it's all going to be apps, is now saying apps are dangerous and only government can step in.
Because, as you point out, you make the distinction between intellectuals and thought leaders, whatever the hell that is. People who deal in cliches and slogans and, you know, but here you have him, as you point out, equating the civil rights movement with inventing an app.
Incredible. You know, I don't fault people for saying and doing what they need to do to feed their families, but look, there's got to be a limit. You know, I think what is, and I remember, you know, the kind of TED conference world is another of these universes. There's many of them, and I gave not one but 2 talks at TED. You know, my talks were not in keeping with what you normally heard at TED, but I was invited to give them, and I gave them. I'm a big believer in going to the lion's den, as you might gather. I think it's important that people hear things that they may not want to hear. But a big part of the consensus in that kind of world, which does in many ways feel quite remote from us now. I think it has receded in some ways and has been punctured. But was this belief that public endeavor is just kind of wasteful and sclerotic and useless. There's this sort of vision out there of public endeavor as the DMV. Like the DMV is all government is. And a big part of what I try to do in Winners Take All is remind people of how extraordinary public problem solving is. And the way public problem solving works, when the government solves some big social problem, it goes into a bucket of things we are never grateful for ever again. We never think of it. When is the last time in the United States of America, except for some occasional story in the news, when is the last time you thought about the safety of food when you go out to eat? Right? My family's from India. Even if you're a pretty prosperous person in India, thinking about the safety of food is a daily, you have to do this all the time. Not washing your vegetables properly in India, it's a matter of life and death. Right? Knowing which restaurants you can eat at, which you can't. which use filtered water, which do boiled and filtered water, which use Himalaya bottled water, even just for cooking. You have to know these things to like survive. It's just a huge amount of mental energy. Just to be safe living in India. I lived in India for 6 years. These calculations are like a big part of life. We used to be like that too, right? Everybody used to be like that at a certain point in history. At a certain point, we invented food safety. We got an FDA, every single piece of meat started being inspected by the federal government, so on and so forth. Restaurants, you got the Department of Health going after restaurants, checking all these things. You don't look at the ratings online because you just trust, and it's true, you are right to trust, that there's some giant regime that you don't even understand that is taking this thing that used to be one of the greatest challenges of human existence, which is dying because of something in food, right? It brought down like a huge fraction of us who ever lived. This giant thing that is still in many parts of the world something you have to think about all the time to survive. We have eliminated that in the United States and many other parts of the country. We've eliminated that. I'm giving you one example of one thing the government does that you don't think about very often.
Which ones?
That is a game changer. Now do what I just did for Social Security. What was it like to be old before
Well,
Social
we
Security?
know from the 1930s, the level of malnutrition and starvation among especially the elderly was very, very high.
What was it like to be without electricity? If you can read the Bob Caro's chapter in the LBJ series about what was it like to have,
So
not have
weird.
electricity.
Oh,
When it
it's
was
still
available, but it was not necessarily profitable or, to bring to certain parts of this
there.
country.
Okay, so
Those women spent,
Then
as he
back
tells
to
it so
school,
beautifully
right?
in that book, like their whole day,
what do you mean you're done?
washing clothes, going to get water, moving the water, thinking about
How did
right?
everything go?
As soon as government solves
Did
the
you do
problem,
good?
it gets no credit anymore. And so you've got these Silicon Valley guys who have invented some app for,
What the heck?
getting a latte a little bit faster. And they feel so triumphant about their capacities as
Okay, so
problem
what place
solvers.
did you get?
And you got your Social Security Administration over here that's
And
doing
both of
like
the
Nobel Peace
ones?
Prize level work every year, right? And it gets no credit. And this basic problem is at the heart of so much what we're talking about. We don't even realize what government does. We don't realize, business people don't realize the amount of their commerce that is enabled by the kind of court system that you and I pay to be, right? And so this ignorance about and disregard for public endeavor, for what government does, for the solution of common problems through common institutions, this ignorance is a big part of the story of what went wrong. And I think we have to help revive in people the idea.
Hey, text me before you get to school so I can get there in time. Like,
I want to
when you get in
Are you
close.
the kind of person who knows things? Things like you can get a domain from Squarespace, not just a website? Well, now you are that person, because now you definitely know you can get a domain from Squarespace. Something like whisperingbloom.com for your silent retreat, or whisperingboom.com for your shouting retreat. Wherever your dream, a Squarespace domain and website brings it to life, all in one place. Get yours before it's gone with offer code MAKEITREAL for 10% off your domain or website. Terms and conditions apply.
I want to ask you about market world. You're right, market world is an ascended power elite that is defined by the concurrent drives to do well and do good, to change the world, while also profiting from the status quo. It consists of enlightened business people and their collaborators in the world of charity, academia, media, government, and think tanks. It has its own thinkers, one of whom we just quoted, whom it calls thought leaders, its own language, even its own territory, including a constantly shifting archipelago of conferences at which its values are reinforced and disseminated and translated into action. Market world is a network and community, but it is also a culture and state of mind. These elites believe and promote the idea that social change should be pursued principally through the free market and voluntary action, not public life and the law and the reform of the systems that people share in common, that it should be supervised by the winners of capitalism and their allies and not be antagonistic to their needs, and that the biggest beneficiaries of the status quo should play a leading role in the status quo's reform. But you make this point in the book. What they do when they retreat to these conferences or the Aspen Institute or the Clinton Global Initiative is they only, you document this in the book, they only bring in speakers who essentially regurgitate what they already believe. They'll pay Thomas Friedman $40,000 a lecture. I think that's what he gets. But because they know that he's going to come in and essentially buttress their own ideology, not as you did, challenge it. So it becomes this bizarre kind of hermetic world, something like the Forbidden City or Versailles.
I think that's a good way to put it. And it goes back to this earlier kind of question I think you were gesturing at, which has to do with the morality of people in this world. Look, I think there are some, in all social worlds, including certainly the business elite, there are some real sickos. That's true. But I think most people are not real sickos, even in these worlds. I think what is actually sadder is that most people are kind of not imaginative enough to think outside the kind of common sense of their world and domain. And when I spent time in these worlds, in conferences, I interviewed people extensively who are in these worlds. It took very rare figures, and my book actually focuses and profiles the rare figures who are sort of seeing outside of their own world, right? Because those are the people I always write about. People who are just steeped in something or not interested. The people who are steeped in it, get it, believe in it, but also are having a crisis of faith, they're the people I'm always trying to write about. But most people in these worlds, I found, they weren't sitting there at the Clinton Global Initiative thinking they're screwing over the world. Like, they're really not. They're sitting there thinking that the corporate partnerships they can put together. I think there was a Starbucks and Goldman Sachs partnership to reduce the racial wealth gap. I may be getting that wrong, but I think there was something like that was being built. That these things hold unprecedented power to make the world better. And I think what is actually so scary to me, sometimes to the point of funny, I don't think a lot of these people are saying this as a kind of lie. I think they deeply believe it's true. And this, in a way, makes them more dangerous. And I'll give you the example that I often think about, which is New York money versus Silicon Valley money, right? New York, again, oversimplifying. New York money is largely financial money. I find it much easier to deal with the New York kind of money. And I'll tell you why. Because no one is deluded about who they are or what they're trying to do, right? You meet any finance person, some of these banks talk is but generally people who work in finance are clear about why they work in finance, and it's to make money. What started to happen in Silicon Valley is the rise of these people who I think genuinely believe, and you see this in an Elon Musk, I think you see this in a Zuckerberg, genuinely believed and thought of them as these kind of world historical figures, these liberators who are going to transform how human society works. And I actually think it's much easier to tax and regulate some rich people who, maybe need to be redistributed from a little bit. But I don't think our society has figured out what to do about the Musks and Zuckerbergs of the world who have these kind of civilizational visions for us and think of themselves as doing capitalism almost for the purpose of redoing humanity.
I want to close by asking you about the Epstein. Like you, I was fascinated with the emails. I thought your column, which I quoted from the New York Times, was really smart because it did just rip back the veil on these people like Lawrence Summers and others, and just showed how shabby their, both not just their moral life, but even their intellectual life was. And so, that it was a kind of one of those moments where we had a window into the inner workings of the elite that you write about.
It was, there's this old this old line, you know, Maya Angelou, and people show you who they are, believe them. When people who normally have private servers protecting their emails, when you get a glimpse of those emails, believe them, because you're not going to get those kind of glimpses very often. You know, it's worth understanding that this is a group of people. We live in an age of oversharing, but this is a group of people who undershare. Right? This is a group of people who are very private. You don't normally know how they operate, and what we most don't know, what we have least access to in a way, is their mentalities, right? How they really think, how they think about us. These are the things that are not filed in IRS forms, that are not filed in lobbying disclosures. And what I, you know, when the Epstein emails came out, released by the House Oversight Committee, I started just reading out of curiosity. And then with the kind of winners take all lens, and for all the reasons that we've talked about today, I started thinking, gosh, I think I see this in a way that's a little bit different, because I guess I was frustrated that week that they came out. Everybody seemed to be, all the journalists seemed to be looking for the same story, which is like, did Donald Trump rape children and was it caught on video, right? Now, I think that's as important a possibility to uncover as anybody else, right? And if that's the case, you know, there could be no more important story, arguably. That said, there were thousands and thousands of emails providing this glimpse into a giant group of elites, and everybody was like a Trump group, was like name searching Trump. And as I was reading them, I was like, I think this other story is really important. By the way, the other story, the story about wealth and power, how they operate, so many of the survivors who have spoken out have said, don't let this just be a story of a small number of people trafficking. Make sure you realize this is a story about wealth and power, right? So, like, the women at the heart of this have understood what they lived through to be a story about wealth and power that took on the flavor of these cruelty, these specific cruelty, but they understood it to operate in a context that made it possible. So I was reading the emails and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna read all these emails because I think there's something here. So I spent 5 or 6 days reading all of the emails. I don't recommend it. And I started making notes, in many ways informed by my work in Winners Take All, about, like, what am I seeing here about the way these people are interacting, about the way they're operating. About, you know, I often think about it as kind of like dance moves. What are the dance moves that we're seeing in this cohort of people? And the more time I spent with it, it seemed to me that we were seeing a portrait of how a power elite operates, how it thinks of us, how it defends its power. And 3 things I would say stood out. Number one, this is a group of people. Almost every email, and so many of the emails start with, where are you? I'm in Tokyo. Where are you? Where are you? When are you going to be in New York? I'm passing through. This kind of what I call the whereabouts inquiry, this kind of echolocation, human echolocation. And what I think that's about is this is a group of people who are actually in the air and not tethered to place. And most of us are tethered to place. Most of us live in a certain community where we have quite a bit of a stake in how that community is. But this group of people is not like us in that way. This power elite is fundamentally global and fundamentally loyal to itself. Second, this is a power elite that kind of the grease in the wheels of its connection was information barter and inside information, intel, edge, as it's called in finance. But these people are constantly trying to give each other and take from each other proprietary knowledge about, you know, who's the new FBI director going to be, or what's that company going to do, or, you know, what are you hearing about the Saudi sovereign wealth fund? That kind of information barter. And third, this is a group of people, and this goes to the heart of so much of your work over the years. This is a group of people who are on the same team, whether Republican or Democrat, this and that, who out there are certainly on opposite sides of important policy questions. I'm not saying that they're all on the same team. They've been on different sides of profound questions. When I say they're on the same team, what I mean is they're like the cast of the play, right? And in the play, you watch the play, and people are yelling at each other in the play, and there's certainly like characters that are in conflict in the play. But what's important for this group of people is that they be the cast, and that other people not be the cast. And when this group of people fails us, when a Larry Summers fails us in pushing for the financial deregulation under Bill Clinton, that then came to fruition in the financial crisis under George W. Bush and Barack Obama. A Larry Summers is not punished. Well, he is punished for that by getting a better job and by becoming a chief advisor in the Obama era, who will now help to oversee how a crisis he helped foment will be addressed. When, as you know so well, the people who have sold fraudulent wars, like the war in Iraq, when they do that and then later their fraud becomes kind of well known and the consensus becomes, you know, even Donald Trump is being like that shouldn't have done that. They are punished for it by getting better professorships, better roles on television. When people fail to protect us from technology, they fail to protect us from environmental ruin, and they fail. This cast of characters, the group of people, this power elite around Epstein, this Epstein class, I think you could say, they survive no matter what happens in the country. They get promoted no matter how badly they fail. And so where it fundamentally landed me at the end of all that reading was, I started, I think, in the same place as a lot of people, which was, how could these eminent people, these bold-faced names, these people from these prestigious institutions, how could they consort with someone like him? Right? There was an inherent hierarchy in the kind of questioning a lot of us were doing. How could a Gates Foundation person, or how could a Harvard person consort with him? And the more you read the emails, the more it seemed to me, of course they could. When he needed new friends after his plea deal and conviction, when he needed new friends to rehabilitate him in society, make his name, scrub his name, he picked a power elite whose superpower was looking away. He, Jeffrey Epstein, and his sex crimes were not the first thing these people had ever looked away from. This was not their first rodeo of looking away. They had looked away at American pain, what you called immiseration, for a generation. They had looked away from it in the form of economic inequality. They had looked away from it in the form of environmental disaster. They had looked away from it in the form of financial crisis. They had looked away from it in the form of needless deaths and bogus wars. Looked away.
Okay.
And so
Wearing your phone?
it became my own question that I began with. How could they consort with him? Became nonsensical the more I read. How could he have chosen
You
anyone
wanted to
else?
see what time Jordan was getting
But
dinner
that
before I
power.
get you something to
He
eat.
chose perfect.
He was at a
Jeffrey
track
Epstein
meet.
knew exactly
That's
what
a
he was
practice
doing.
track
He
meet.
picked
It wasn't
a
a real
group of
one.
people who,
And he said somebody stole his
Are
socks out of his
excellent.
shoes.
if at nothing else,
Why was I
In-
still in socks?
putting fingers in their ears
That's what I want to know.
when
Why somebody
people
stole
begin
his
to
shoes?
scream.
Why they stole his socks?
Great, thanks. And on that, your book is wonderful, beautifully written, winners take all. And I want to thank Victor and Sophia, Thomas, Diego, and Max who produced the show. You can find me at chrisedges.substack.com.
Thank you so much for having me.
You probably know this is great for business owners. Did you know you print everything you need to get your brand in front of your fans? We print banners and signs that help your business stand out. We print postcards and flyers that get people talking. And we print must-have merch like tote bags, t-shirts, and water bottles. Whether you want a few or a few thousand, we print on everything so that customers can go from noticing your brand to falling in love with it.
Right now, new customers can get 25% off with code NEW25. Because if you need it, we print it at vistaprint.com.
If you are an economist who helps guide a deregulation agenda that tanks the economy, you will get promoted. If you are a foreign affairs expert who helps sell a war that turns out to be a lie, you will literally get a better professorship and TV gig, right? There is, in this country, a group of people who survive at the top no matter what.
Anand, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back with you.
It is so good to talk to you. I should let the folks know that we are recording this in the afternoon of Monday, December 1, the first Monday and the first day of the last month of 2025. It's been a great 12 or 13 years this year. How you doing? How'd you make out this year?
We both had black hair in January, right?
Yes, I had an encroaching hairline back in the beginning of 2025.
What a decade this year has been.
What a decade this year has been. But let's first talk about the most recent important event for a lot of people, Thanksgiving. As I was telling you before we hit the record button, I saw you on TV on Morning Joe talking about Thanksgiving. And you mentioned that your wife, your very lovely wife, Priya, had made some suggestions for questions that did not relate to politics and wasn't the usual type of question that friends and families could ask each other. Could you mention a couple by way of example to the audience?
So my wife, Priya Parker, is a conflict facilitator by training, and her superpower is, you know, when people come into a room, and you've dealt with this in your both of your careers, the legal one as well as the podcasting one. People come into a room, they have scripts, right?
Yeah.
Witness has things that they want to say. Lawyer has things they want to get out of them. A podcast guest has a book they're trying to, promote with a message. And Priya's superpower is to get people off their scripts. So Thanksgiving, we often go around the table in our family, many families, what are you grateful for? So Priya was like, this year, how can we give people some different questions to get you off your scripts?
Yeah.
Right? Because when you're on your script, you're not thinking. And it's a shame to have people around the table and no one thinking, everyone just being on their script. So she published these 40 questions on her Substack, which is called Group Life. Really good, you should check it out. And one of them was actually from my daughter, who's 7, and came up with a question of what is the naughtiest thing you've ever done that was worth it? We've done that question before, and it's so good.
Do you have an answer to that question, Anand?
Yeah, but not for your podcast.
Whose podcast would it be for?
You're still kind of a cop. I mean, I know you're a podcast, but
would you tell them?
no offense, but I mean,
What's so funny is, it just reminds me, I shouldn't tell this, but, obviously I'm pretty vocal in my views against Donald Trump. And I have a lot of progressive views, but I'm not the most progressive person in America. I'm centrist on various things. And I said something along those lines, and somebody tweeted, you kind of forget that, Preet's all anti-Trump, and we love that. But he's still a cop with a podcast, which he didn't mean as a compliment.
you should just own it. This should be like on the buses.
And I'm like, does that guy want to defund me? Like, how's that?
A cop with a podcast.
Do cops with podcasts also get defunded? How does that, from the liberals, how does that work? Okay,
Yeah,
you don't have to
can have something like, I'd rather be a cop with a pod than a pod with a cop. You can play with it.
Yeah, I'll have to ask ChatGPT about that. All right, so that's a good question. What's another question? And what question did you actually?
Oh, the one I loved, the one I really loved, which we didn't end up doing, was what is a moment when you realize you were becoming more like someone else in this family?
Yeah.
And it's a really easy, seemingly easy way, including for kids, because we have 2 little kids and a nephew. It's an easy way into, heritage and these kind of bigger ideas of what make us us. And And we ended up actually doing one question on Thanksgiving, and then the next
Okay.
day, or actually Saturday night, we did another one about, you know, what
I'm getting Mia's hair braided.
was the thing that will surprise you this year,
Huh?
and what do you most want to carry into
What?
or have happen to you next year? Anyway, we love these questions, and it's really amazing to. It's a little bit like how really elegantly designed technologies are as easy for 8-year-olds as they are for 80-year-olds. Like a really good question like that.
Did you already get something to eat?
Sort of has the same function. Somehow you get the 80-year-old
The money I sent you?
and the 8-year-old to kind of be on the same page, and it's a good way to
Do you
sneak
still have the money I
some
sent you?
heritage into the mac and cheese of a fun, zesty conversation.
So I'm gonna move from, you know, a tasty subject like Thanksgiving
Alright, love you, bye.
to a pretty nasty subject, but it's one that occupies a lot of time and attention on the part of law enforcement, on the part of DOJ, more or less depending on your perspective, politics, Democrats, Republicans, the wealthy, the elite. And that's this, even though he's been dead for a number of years, and that's the matter of Jeffrey Epstein. And the reason I'm asking you about it is you wrote, I thought, a particularly interesting article which went on at some length. New York Times pay you by the word on it? How does that go?
Everyone needs an editor freak.
No, it was good. I like the length. There's a lot to chew on.
We should have seen how long it originally was.
How long was the original?
I think it was getting close to 5,000 words before, and
That's the New Yorker.
and we
That's
cut it
the
down
New
to
Yorker.
3,000.
It's not the New Yorker, not New York Times.
And I have to say that I was very gratified. The New York Times published it 3,000 words online, and then they gave it a full page, which is what 3,000 words takes to get
No,
a full
it's
page.
deserving. I don't agree with everything there, and I have some questions about some of your assessments, but what's interesting about your piece, well, many things. It's thoughtful as your pieces always are, even if everyone doesn't agree with all of it, or doesn't understand all of it. But, you know, from my perspective, I come at it from the law, right? It's my old office that prosecuted Ghislaine Maxwell. I think about what's happening to her in prison. We talked about the circumstances surrounding his death. So it's like, it's crime and punishment. You talk about the Epstein phenomenon from the perspective of the people who were in his circle. So in preparation for the article, the reason you required as many words as you did, in part, is because you did a thing. It took you 5 days. What did you do?
I decided, and I don't recommend this.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you did it.
I read all of the emails basically for 5 days, 6 days, something like that. And it's interesting, you know, I finished a book, not related to this, recently that is kind of in production. I'm not yet in my next book. So I'm in this moment when I have more creative time and I have time to think about things in a bigger way, which, you know, I call it the off season for a non-athletic person like me. And these emails came around and I was just reading the same press like everybody else.
Just
And then part of me was like,
I didn't mean to interrupt you like that, but, and these emails came from where?
they came from the House Oversight Committee, so they were released by the House Oversight Committee. And, you know, there have been some earlier things released, but this was a giant pile of, I think, 20,000 plus documents. Many of them emails. And I was kind of reading the press coverage like everybody else and, you know, seeing these different frames being put on it. And then
Sorry.
I was like,
It's okay.
I'm a
How old are
words
you?
person. I'm a
Okay.
text person.
Oh wow.
I should read these emails. I don't know
You
what
sound so
for, I don't know if
mature.
it's gonna become something.
Thank
And
you.
by the way, like you and I are, you know, do independent media. And I'm like, independent media actually allowed me to do that, right? Before it was a New York Times article, before it was a commission from anybody, I was able to say, you know what? This is gonna take days. I didn't know how many days. This is gonna take a long time. But I am going to take that long time because a lot of what I was reading was like Larry Summers got dating advice as the story, or this thing, or, you know, finding a thing. There was a lot of like name search journalism, and I understand it because I've been on Deadline as a journalist. Like I understand the pressures, but it felt like we had gotten this really rare glimpse into how a very powerful group of people thinks, talks behind our back, and And we were just getting a bunch of tabloid stories or people looking for connections to Donald Trump. And so I said, let me just read this. And I started reading day one, day two. It was 12 tranches. I don't think I finished, the first tranche on the first day. It was just a lot of stuff.
Hey, can I picture this? Did you print them out?
No,
You read them on,
I think it would have been bigger than this room. I mean, it was like,
read them on your laptop or your
it
phone?
was on a, it's a Google Drive that the House Oversight Committee
Okay.
put out. So then there's 12 tranches, you go into tranche one, and there's 4 or 5 folders within that, and you go into images, and then it's like images of all these.
So you started at the top and you just plowed your way.
I started at the top and I just kept reading. And a lot of it, the way you'd imagine if you'd go into an email, I'm sure you know this more than me, is that a lot of it becomes repetitious because it's one email, the original email, and then there's like a thread, so then you kind of, all the things get reprinted again.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of repetition. But I started reading. And the first impression I had was, it's as boring, a lot of it, as your and my emails, right? It's, what time is this gonna happen? What time is this person getting in? It's in some ways, it's, for all the insanity of that email box, it's also a person's email box. But the more I kept reading, and these bold-faced names, the Larry Summerses, people from the Gates Foundation and Harvard and all these other institutions emerged, the more I realized that I was getting a glimpse of an entire social network, a group of people who shared certain codes of speech, certain ways of thinking, certain shorthands, right? The same way a profession, your profession, legal profession, has habits of mind, habits of speech. Well, this is not a profession, but it is a social network that in many of the same ways has a culture, has mores, has lines, boundaries, connectivity. And I realized I was really getting an anthropological look into a group of people who are very good at making sure you don't get a look into how they operate. That's sort of one of their most important undertakings. They all spend a lot of money through lawyers and IT people and others to make sure you don't get this kind of glimpse normally. So the more I read, I was like, this is important not just because you can get a kind of base hit story of Larry Summers said this one thing, or the Gates Foundation had this one connection, but rather precisely because of the network effect of this group of people and a rare chance to understand them. So I started reading for that understanding. And a couple things emerged as I did that reading. One, it flipped around this basic question that everybody's been asking, which is, how could all these prestigious, eminent people, you got monster over here, Jeffrey Epstein the monster over here, which everybody agrees on. But how could all these people, who in a way we're saying, obviously are not quite like him or at all like him, how could, cabinet secretaries and CEOs and prominent Democrats and prominent Republicans and people who, men, women, all kinds of people, eminent people from eminent institutions, how could they consort with a guy like this?
Yeah.
And the more I read, the more that became a kind of question with an obvious answer. This was a group of people, diverse in their own way, but with this fundamental thing in common. So many of them belonged to this kind of elite social network that was, I think, able to look away at the pain that Jeffrey Epstein had caused, at the abuse he had engaged in, because looking away was a superpower in this social network. It was an essential skill for a lot of these people, and one that didn't begin to be practiced when Jeffrey Epstein came back to society looking for rehabilitation. This looking away happened when folks in this network were looking away from economic distress that many of them have caused in financial crises. It was economic pain. It was a looking away that they practiced as they kind of allowed technologies to run rampant over, teenage girls with body image issues and workers being obsolesced. It was a looking away that has allowed for the most extraordinary concentration of wealth and power in 100 years. So when you look at what does this group of people have in common despite differences of party and profession and more? This is a social network of people. Again, not every single person, but this is a social network of people that is actually quite good at disregarding pain. That is quite quickly able to lift the fingers to the ears when people are screaming. And so then it became less and less of a surprise that they'd been able to look away from his crimes.
So some people would say, if you think of the list of folks who were corresponding in that set of emails that you spent 5 days reading, a lot of those people, and I know you have a view on philanthropy, but some of those people did not look away from certain categories of pain. They have focused on it, they've invented things, they have tried to bring solutions to economies other than the United States. There's a whole lot of looking at problems and looking at pain and solving pain in some quarters on the part of some of those people. How do you explain if you agree with A, do you agree with that? And B, so far as it goes, and then B, do these people compartmentalize where they look at pain and where they turn away? And do they do both?
It's a great point. And I'm not saying nobody here worked on those issues. What I'm saying is, my book, Winners Take All, which you and I talked about a long time ago, made this argument that often in this powerful social network of people, what Ro Khanna, congressman from California, calls the Epstein class, even when they look at the problem, there is a looking away. Right? That's another way to think about the argument that I made in Winners Take All, which is that you think about someone like Bill Gates looking at the problem of public health and vaccines in COVID, and using his voice and clout in that moment to insist on patents.
You're 10 minutes late for work, but you were 20 minutes late yesterday. It's a good day for a good deal at Outback Steakhouse. Get down under favourites like the Aussie 3-course starting at $14.99 with savoury soup or fresh salad, your choice of select entrees like the juicy bloomin' burger and New York-style cheesecake for dessert. It's a deal so delicious you'll only be 5 minutes late tomorrow, maybe 4. Try the Aussie 3-course starting at $14.99. Any reason is a good reason to celebrate at Outback Steakhouse. No rules, just right.
Right? So there's a looking at a problem, but because you are who you are as a billionaire, because you come with the interests and worldview you do, it is possible to look at and look away at the same time. And I would say, you and I have both probably been to more than one charity gala in New York City, where people in tuxedos gather around, right? I would say, Preet, that room is full of people who are looking, on one level, looking at poverty, looking at want in New York or wherever. And I would say, at a meta level, what is actually happening in that room is often looking away. So you are right that in this network, by the MIT Media Lab, there's all kinds of people doing all kinds of stuff related to poverty, right? And that was one of the institutions that helped rehabilitate him. I'm sure Larry Summers has written many sentences about poverty in his life. The question is, what was the prevailing attitude to power in this community? And when you had someone like Larry Summers, for example, an architect of financial deregulation, which many experts will tell you culminated later on in the financial crisis, right? In our system of, you're a justice guy, we unfortunately don't live in a world in which people like that get justice. We live in a world in which people like that have impunity, and a Larry Summers, having helped bring about, along with many others, a financial crisis in 2008, becomes rewarded as Barack Obama's chief economic advisor, right? And I think if I were to go to nice parties in New York and say that, people would say, that's unfair, that's unfair. But I think like 95% of people in this country feel very deeply the truth that they can make no mistakes, that there is literally no margin for mistakes anymore in this country.
61, 61.
Make a mistake, they're sick.
Where did you see that from?
61, 61.
Helps guide a deregulation
No,
agenda
not mommy book.
that tanks the economy.
61,
You will get
61.
if you are a foreign affairs expert.
Where's the meaning of city mom?
You will literally get a better professorship and teaching gig right?
I hope this
There
is it hot in this room? No.
Not to me.
in this country a group of people who survive
Mommy,
at the
Mhm.
time.
my friend
No matter
said
what.
my
And
bad,
what I
a
found
bad word for me.
are
Oh, what did your
surviving
friend say?
because they live in
A
this
bad
parallel society where they trade information, non-public information, they trade favors, they are constantly checking in on each other and offering each other kind of intel on this, that, introductions, you need to meet this person, do you need an investor for your fund, right? Regular Americans are starting GoFundMes to fund their medical bills. But in this group, you happen to be passing through Athens, Jeffrey Epstein or someone else will say, oh, I know an investor in Athens. Would you like to meet an investor for your fund? And so it is a kind of footloose, fancy-free elite that has internalized the impunity that has been a fact in this country, that has internalized. You know, you could imagine a different America in which 1,000 people had gone to prison for 2008.
Well,
You could imagine such a society.
yes, you can also imagine that, yes, I have a lot to say about this in the past.
And I'm not saying you, I'm just saying in general, like one could imagine a society that had put fewer people dealing pot in prison over the years and more people for causing a financial crisis.
Right, and on that, we don't
We want a society that is
We don't have to
on one end of that. Say it again?
right, in my view, that is an easy political slogan that doesn't fully take into account why we have the laws we have and how we bend over backwards in our criminal justice system to make sure that notwithstanding what people think, when you look at these political prosecutions, the people who are targets of a federal or local criminal prosecution have all sorts of benefits, advantages, and rights as against the, sometimes, characterized as jackbooted cops. Well, we can talk about that another time.
But even holding all those constant, we certainly prioritize low-level drug dealers with that same regime of protections and whatever. We end up with like more people on prison for those kinds of things than any other country. And then you look at an opioids crisis, or you look at, the financial crisis and other things. Or I would even say things like climate change, right, which is certainly a mass death event of a different kind, with a lot of willful blindness and fraud and other things. I don't think it's just a political slogan. We have made a choice to be very, very tough and not very second chancey for lots of people. And suddenly all the protections of our system, which are real and are important, I agree with you on that, play a much bigger role in why people who happen to be powerful don't get prosecuted.
As a general matter, for lots of different reasons, psychological, forensic, and otherwise, it is easier to get away with a fraud than it is to get away with a violent crime or narcotics crime, right? You catch someone with a dope, essentially they're guilty. It's a lot harder to do some of that other stuff. This concept of the elite, and I know we've talked about this before, I don't mean this to be a cheap podcast host turning of the tables, but I'm sure you get this all the time, right? Where did you write this piece? In the so-called failing New York Times. We're doing a podcast, you have a Substack, you have a lot of folks who listen to you. You, as you said, get invitations to these events. Who's elite and who's not? Is the elite monolithic? Are you elite? Am I elite? Is being categorizable as an elite necessarily pejorative? Last question, which is the easiest of the whole bunch. How should one live one's life for the sake of, but that's the question that is implied by your critique, right? The reason I find you so interesting and thoughtful is all of your work, not all of your work, but much of your work and the work that we have talked about raises implicitly the question, okay, fine. What should these guys be doing, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you're hugely talented at coding or at acting, and then you get to be in the elite, whatever that means, whether it's the Epstein elite or the Epstein class or otherwise. What are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to become Buddha?
So first things first, because I think your question is fair and should be addressed.
Yeah.
Right? there is sometimes this question that is put to me and others. Why are you criticizing this elite if you have had good fortune?
Yeah.
And I think, my God, the first and only thing to spend good fortune on is the freedom it gives you to be more honest.
Yeah.
Than you would be able to be if.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
And
People
so,
don't like people who renounce their class.
and I'm not, like, this piece, there's all kinds of elites, right? There's an educated elite, there's a professorial elite, there's a legal elite, there is a kind of political elite, people who elected office and people around those people. Like, many of those are very important in our society. I have specifically in my writing written about a oligarchic elite, which is to say people who have probably more money than they would in a more fair society, who use that money specifically to buy political power that they're not entitled to in a one person, one vote system, right? I do not rail against, some people having PhDs and therefore teaching when others are not teaching. Like, it is okay for there to be various forms of gradation in society. I don't rail against people with law degrees having a monopoly on the practice of law. I am very specifically focused on the idea. My failing is that I took my grade school education at its word. I was told one person, one vote. I was told that a lot of people died for that at home and abroad. And when I see distortions to it, I get upset. And I will say, I have had good fortune, and I've written about my good fortune. And part of why I'm able to read those emails is I understand those people. I have written about them for years. I have been in those rooms, as you have. And I often find that critics of those worlds often don't understand those worlds very well. Often don't understand how they actually work, right? I often hear from people, well, this TV channel that you work for, like, executives must be calling you every day to tell you not to say this, not to say that. I mean, it's interesting that's the fantasy in their head. Like, it's literally never happened. By the way, it happens in all kinds of other ways that those people are unaware of. And having the actual textured understanding of how these institutions work, how people think. So I have been in many of those rooms. I've also spent a lot of time in my life and reporting career sitting in mud floors, reporting and talking to people about their lives. But I have been in those rooms. I try to get in any room I can. And what I try to do is not become a citizen of the room just because I'm honored to be invited or because the drinks are nice. I try to retain the integrity of saying what I think and what I find to be true, regardless. And I've done it long enough that I don't know. I keep going to the rooms. Like
So why do they keep inviting you to the rooms?
Well, I think I don't get invited to a lot of rooms, but I get invited to enough. Because I'll tell you something. At some very deep level, and people have said this to me from these worlds. Tom Wolfe had this line about writers as being like the village gossip. Like, writers are not like always thinking about these things, out of their head, like inventing these thoughts. There are all of these ideas that you and I might talk about. They're out there in people, right? You work at a law firm, you work for a big corporation, if you work in the government, a lot of feelings you might have about the way that place is run, about the way the law works, about the way the system works.
Of course.
You can't say those things in many of the contexts you operate in. The more senior you are, you may not even be able to say those things to your spouse. So there's a lot of public opinion out there that is laying late, that is lurking in people. And so when someone like me or someone like, name the person, absorbs those things, often from talking to people, often from, those whisperings, sitting in my living room, and then can go find them through reporting, find those intuitions through reporting. What often actually happens is that people in those worlds feel a certain relief. because they can't say it, but they actually want it said, right? Because, and this happens when I wrote Winner's Take All, even some of these billionaires literally wrote to me. I'm like, thank you for writing that. Like, I disagree with this, I disagree with that, but thank you for saying this thing. Because you know what? Even billionaires recognize that living in a society in which most people are miserable, and most people who with a dream and an idea can't realize it anymore, it actually starts to suck for them too, right? You and I have spent time in India. You can have all of God's money in India, right? There's a lot about India, and even your experience of India as a billionaire, that is limited by the quality of the average in India. The quality of institutions is unfortunately related to the quality of the average. The quality of the water, which you can't fully remove from your life, water is in everything, is related to the quality of the average. At some point, I think even the most powerful people realize it's no fun
Right.
to live in a place where everybody's life is grim but yours.
And I'm asking this because I'm really interested in the answer, right?
Or how to live.
Well, because let me reframe it. You know, we could be Aristotle for a moment, you know, the examine life. If you're a person who wants to do good, and let's say you didn't come by your billion in one of the 4 ways that Robert Reich says are the only ways to become a billionaire. Just stipulate with me for a moment, you might have a critique of this stipulation, but stipulate with me for a moment that there's a person who didn't break the law, didn't inherit his or her wealth, and was an excellent investor or invented something, and obviously had largesse from the government, and it took a village and all sorts of other things. And they find themselves at age, 50 with a few $1 billion. And they got to that point because they were focused on the business, or they were focused on the investing, or whatever the case may be, or they got lucky and they invested in something before it was big. And they have a lot of money and they work really hard and they're pretty smart, and they may be undeserving of the $3 billion, because who could possibly be deserving of $3 billion? They're not criminal and they're not heirs. And now they wake up in the morning and they want to do good and they want to do well, and you're having dinner with them, and they say to you, Anand, I didn't do this for the money, I did this because I care about chips, or I care about processing, or I care about, or whatever the case may be. And I want to live a good life, and I want to make the world better, and I want to make my country better, and I want to make the rest of the world better. Should I give all my money away? I was thinking about starting a foundation, but Anand, you talk about how philanthropy is like an excuse. I don't want to look bad in your eyes if I do that. Should I spend all my money on political advocacy for the kinds of things that are going to structural change? Should I diversify the way that I spend my money to make the world better? How do you think, what would you say to a person like that at dinner?
So I'll give you one kind of overall framework and then some more specific thoughts. I think there's a quote I love. I think this is actually from a moment, as far as I recall, where Desmond Tutu was asked to speak to a group of very wealthy people. I guess I only get invited to things like that when he was not available. So he was
not bad.
Speaking to this group of philanthropists, and he said something along the lines of, you are like, don't do your work, philanthropic work, to make the poor more comfortable in their chains. Break the chains. So I would start with a distinction between, there are forms of giving that are essentially in the business of making chains more comfortable. You could have velvet on the chains. You could coat the chains in butter. You could try a metal that doesn't get as cold. Like, there's various ways you could imagine being in the chain comfort increase business. And then you could just imagine other things that are in the chain breaking business, right? So now let me be very specific. So if we were to think about education, and a lot of what these people have done is essentially accept a system in this country that funds public education through property taxes and local property taxes. So basically, if you live in nice places, you get nice schools. If you live in poor places, you get shitty schools. We all know this. It's actually crazy if you think about it. It's not it's not that far away from being as crazy as racial segregation because it effectively becomes racial segregation in a lot of parts of this country. We all know it, and it's all just there, and it's a great example of like chains. Okay, so now you think about a lot of what happens in philanthropy or in education, which is a favorite topic of these people because they're often education was very important in their own life. I would say broadly it's a lot of chain comfort increase, right? Let's have this charter school, let's have this program, let's fix this curriculum, let's have some black girls and get, you know, some STEM coding class after school.
Okay, so what should you do
I
instead?
struggle to think about a very wealthy person who's invested in the idea of education, who has said, I'm taking on property tax-based education funding in this country. By the way, if someone with Bill Gates' clout and money was like, I'm gonna get rid of that way of funding education, that's the civil rights struggle like, that's within the kind of orbit of something someone like that would do.
Okay. That's very aspirational.
Sure,
He's
so with civil rights.
yes, but Bill Gates, he has a lot of money. How would you propose he could use that money to undo local laws that fund public education, not at the federal level, but in town after town after town, city after city after city? Maybe he could launch a public ad campaign, maybe he could give money to particular people, but there are a lot of billionaires. I'm just playing devil's advocate for the sake of sharpening our arguments. There are a lot of billionaires who have causes. They're not that cause, and maybe it should be that cause. But they have other causes and they don't get their way. They don't even get elected to office. We believe, you know, it is sometimes the case that I think.
I'm just asking, has anybody tried on that issue of prominence?
I don't
Because they all start charter schools, they all do these little programs that you and I know very well. I'm just saying, isn't it interesting that not one person of prominence in a big way has taken on that? You can disagree with me on whether that's a good, I'm just telling you, I think it's interesting.
Okay, what if you're not Bill Gates?
That's a
What
pretty
if you're
big area of why our,
what if you're my hypothetical was, again, we're a little bit philosophizing. I chose a hypothetical of like the very, very rich person who has more money they can spend in their entire lifetime, but not in the top 5 of the world, right? A lot of wealth. So that person, so I'm gonna change it a little bit or make it more concrete, so we can get a model for that for the person I'm talking about. So if you have Bill Gates' kind of money, you can do that gigantic moonshot kind of a thing. What if you're not Bill Gates' kind of money? You're just very, very rich.
I mean, well, there's a few answers. One is you could do that in one place, right? I mean, I remember I was in Cleveland where I actually grew up until I was 10 years old and doing an event for Winners Take All. And a group of people who I think knew each other and young people worked together on some of these issues came to me and they said, you know, you have no idea, like you're writing about lots of very prominent rich people in this book, but they're like, the dynamic you're writing about is more pronounced in a place like Cleveland. I was like, why? They're like, well, for the exact reason you just said, no one in Cleveland is like, I'm going to transform education all around the world, the way Bill Gates is, right?
Yeah.
And it's not the same level of wealth. But there's definitely people with like $800 million in Cleveland. There's definitely people with like a couple $1 billion in Cleveland, right?
I don't know if there's that.
But there's some money in that city, and what those people end up doing is very much like the chain comfort increase, right? Because they don't even have those kind of global ambitions, and so it's all just like orchestra, stadium, little arts program, and a place like Cleveland that is, you know, the larger area, like still very segregated in all these ways, they just don't touch that stuff.
So can I give an example of something in between those two things maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Is our efforts, including the expenditure of money on the part of a rich person to dramatically reduce death from malaria in Africa. Is that a bad thing to do? Is that putting
It's not a
velvet on
bad
chains?
thing to do, and again, like this.
No, okay. But is there, what's the critique of that?
Okay, so there's several.
Yeah.
They're separate, and it depends on what actually happens, the way those programs work, because there's a range of outcomes. So, some of the things, obviously, if you are spending money and saving lives, that's a good thing, and that very much goes in the category of like the good part of it. And sometimes maybe we can imagine that's the only thing going on. But let's speculate that may not be the only thing going on in that equation. So here are some of the other things that go on that just need to be held in conversation with the good thing going on. One thing that has gone on, and there's a lot of scholarship on this, Dambisa Moyo has a great book called Dead Aid about this, is that aid of that kind, philanthropy, foreign aid even as it helps people, can sometimes distort the relationship between leaders and their own public, right? So there have been arguments made that when you start to have leaders who are basically getting all their money from international organizations, they basically manage for that client instead of the client of the public. And the traditional taxation representation bond, where leaders are accountable to people because they're raising money from them, doesn't develop, right? That's one thing. You also have the question of whether those programs are run well and whether they are run with the biases of those people. You know, the Gates Foundation, quite famously in Africa, was run in a very McKinsey spreadsheet kind of way that often missed lots of social context. You and I know those guys, like, they're not very smart about certain kinds of things, about people and societies and communities and power. Well, to the extent that fighting HIV means understanding those kinds of social contexts, it's often just like an imperious force that has limited human intelligence about those kinds of things. That's been another problem. Then there's been the problem of interests, right? So going back to the Bill Gates patent example, you help. But when the help conflicts potentially with your ideological proclivities or your class proclivities, that, you know, patents are important, intellectual property is important. You might find that people like that end up siding with their own cohort instead of with the people they're serving. So again, no one is saying that the individual malaria net that arrives and saves life, it's fantastic. But unfortunately, it has to be understood in the context of a distribution of power that is insane. And the core thing that I tried to raise in Winners Take All is, how do we understand the ways in which some of these good deeds, not all of them, but some of them, are, even as they are helping some people, also doing a second thing, which is shoring up the system that hurts way more people,
yeah.
Right? And so it's easy to count the number of people saved by malaria nets. It's a very easy math to do. It is harder to count the amount of death and suffering that is caused by, you know, that country remaining poor because of its debt obligations that, you know, the same country that may be donating those nets is refusing to compromise on the debt.
Yeah.
Right? And so I was always up against something very difficult with Winners Take All, because people were like, here's some help right here. Are you saying this help is bad? But I think at the end of the day, you just have to look at the outcomes. For all of this help that has been done, for all this philanthropy, it's $400 billion a year in America spent on philanthropy. Does anybody feel like they're getting a better, healthier distribution of power year by year at the end of that $400 billion? Like, do you feel like, okay, they spent $400 billion philanthropically last year, philanthropy meaning for the love of mankind. Does anyone feel the love? Right? And if not, then it raises two possibilities. One, people are delusional, or two, which I'm more likely to believe, that $400 billion of philanthropy is not quite doing the thing we imagine it may be doing. And it might, in fact, net, be doing more to preserve power relations that are morally indefensible, even as it gestures just enough at helping just enough people to keep the whole thing going.
Through various responses, just for the sake of understanding where you're coming from, it's not clear to me that everybody thinks in terms that you and I might think about them. Power structure, relationship to wealth, mobility. These are things that we value and we think are important. But when you ask the question, does the $400 billion do X or Y, the way you formulate it, very articulate. If ask a different way, I don't know, the recipients of some portion of that, sitting with the malaria, will have life, will live a long life, who had children and families because of some of that largesse. You know, I don't know which bargain they would take. Because life is important.
Can I tell you one little example that I think you'll know and relate to? We both had
Do you want Apple Pay or you want
origins,
Zelle?
family origins in India, and
Do you have that? No.
I remember going to India as a child, growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, go to India. Very, very different society, very different distribution of power. Very, mostly poor people and a very small number of people.
So the 83231.
And
Yes, ma'am.
I remember, my family was fortunate to be in those privileged ranks. And in those privileged ranks, everybody has servants,
Yeah, so sweet.
drivers, secretaries who come in and clean the floor and the bathrooms because the Indian kind of way of thinking, you don't want the people cooking to also be cleaning bathrooms. You have middle class people in India who have multiple servants. And in India, there's this thing that happens anytime there's a kind of calamity. A lot of these servants will live in the city by themselves, their family, their children, their wife or husband back in the village somewhere in a rural area, very poor area. With no money, no jobs in that area. So this money is being sent home. And anytime anything goes wrong in the extended clan of one of those servants, someone's roof
How many
caves
do you
in,
want me
a
to
nephew
pour
gets
in?
in a motorcycle accident, someone is sick in a hospital.
Should I do 5
Members of the Indian elite unfailingly will give money to that servant, say, send it home to the village, no questions asked, not a loan, just go fix the roof, go get your nephew healed, get a new motorbike. And you could see it on the surface, and when I was young and looking at that, you could say these are very generous people. In America, people are not regularly giving, handing out money to other people for like fix their roof. What a generous society. The older I got, I realized that it wasn't a generous society at all. Because the people doing that ad hoc giving were standing on top of a system that they absolutely insisted on keeping. A system in which there's no minimum wage, effectively, for people in those jobs. They work night and day. There's little bells that are rung and wake them up, no one cares. They sleep on the floor in many people's houses in the Indian elite. Beautiful food is being had in the house, but they'll have a giant metal plate just of rice and maybe a little bit of dal, lentil soup. And so you have these little acts of generosity all the time. Your roof, your motorcycle, and that. But everybody doing those acts of generosity is profoundly committed to nothing changing. And it's really clear when you look at someone else's society.
Yeah.
I think when you look at our own, it is more like that. When you're talking about the super elite, I really like to.
I'm doing my best here to promote your thinking and thoughts, thinking of philosophy. I don't know what you call it, because that's going back to what your arguments imply on the scale. I don't know what the following point. But there is, in fact, on the part of the ultra-wealthy, no legal, statutory, constitutional obligation to do any of this. Not to save people from malaria, not to save people from cancer, not to give them a roof, over their heads that doesn't have leaks in it. And so the philosophical question I have is, what's the and I think there are several that could be, because when I read what you write and I hear what you say, I think, well, what's the principle on which we require from these people who have so much money that they not only should do things where they power and money, but particular things, right? In your mind, a better thing to do would maybe even take up a quixotic fight against how we fund schools rather than solving a malaria problem. That's fair. Is it that from whom, to whom much is given, much is expected, whether that's wealth, authority, or anything else? And on that score, as a philosophical matter, and maybe you don't want to delve into this because it's beyond the scope of conversation, but it's fascinating to me. If you're an ordinary person of ordinary means, but you have some extraordinary talent, maybe you have extraordinary political gifts, is it an abdication of your responsibility to humanity and your fellow citizens in your country or your community not to seek power? Because I'll tell you, depending on the state, depending on the senator, and depending on the billionaire, pound for pound, a person who can make policy in government can do a lot more than someone can do with $1 billion. That's arguably why Michael Bloomberg spent a gazillion dollars and got one electoral vote. But do you care to opine at all on the obligations of other people who are
this is gonna surprise you.
Oh no.
I actually am not focused at all, nor do I actually think there is much of an obligation of these super elites to do anything. You asked me a setup of if there was such a person with this money, what should they do? So I can answer that. But I actually would not put any stock or expectation on that happening. I actually have a view of them that I actually think is more honest and frankly freeing for them, which is like, if you are a money-making person, just make your money. What I want to have happen is for the rest of us to figure out a distribution of power, a structure of regulation that makes sense for us, right? I actually think what has gotten very confused is government trying to work on behalf of what business people want and business people trying to solve the social good. It's all very confusing, right? When you go, I had a close friend of mine who's a French guy, lives in Paris, works in private equity, has done very well for himself. He's like, every time he comes to America, he's like, American business people are crazy. He's like, it is so great being a rich guy in France. Because you know what? You just try to make money, and you don't have on your conscience that the way you acquired that company is gonna take healthcare away from people. You don't have on your conscience, should we shift that base of old employees from a defined benefit pension to this, that? Like in France, a business guy can just be a business guy. In America, a business guy is making these kingly decisions about whether people will live or die. It's a really interesting perspective. I actually want our business people to just be business people. And what people may not realize, but you know very well because you know the law, everything that happens in the economy, everything that happens in capitalism, happens in a permission structure, a very detailed permission structure of the law. Everything that happens, every contract, etc., every wage that is paid. So we don't need kindness from people who've had great fortune in their life. Although if there is some, and they actually want to listen to this and do some real system change, fantastic. We don't need that. We need to actually reform the permission structure so that there are rules. When you are paying someone, can you do this form of wage theft or can you not? Some countries you can't, some countries it's really easy to. Very simple, it's just a rule. When you want to bust a union and you see one forming, can you do X, Y, Z or can you not do X, Y, Z? Some countries you can, some countries you can't. It's not crazy, it's just like, there's variety around the world enough to see that, you change this rule, you get this outcome. Vinod Khosla, one of the most successful fellow Indian American, one of the most successful venture capitalists.
Been a guest on this show.
He is someone who is very much in this world, but he sees it from outside also, right? He's an insider-outsider in many ways. He said to me once, what a lot of my peers, his peers, don't understand is that capitalism exists by permission of democracy. What that means is there is nothing there's nothing unlawful about a 95% capital gains tax and marginal income. There's nothing unlawful about it. It could be an unwise policy choice. But here,
Creativity is not something I wait for. I am Anthony Sendren, a filmmaker. I'm always hunting and hustling for ideas. Adobe Creative Cloud is designed to be almost like a playground. They provide you with some really inspiring tools for you to start. It allows me to disappear in the creative process. It's about the making. Adobe Creative Cloud gets me into the zone.
but if everyone wanted to do it, or 95% of people want to do it, it could be done. Right? So you wouldn't have a lot of capitalism left after that. Capitalism exists by permission of democracy. So there will be people who have more and people who have less. But at some point, the people in the bubble of capitalism and stewarding it, if you lose all the people on the outside, they're not going to give you permission anymore. They're not going to renew your permission. And my warning to those people would be, you now have in both parties people running against you. Donald Trump fraudulently, and some people on the left more seriously, but the idea that there's a wealthy, powerful elite that is rigging the system to the exclusion of most people has now become an issue of consensus in American life in a way that it was not when you and I were growing up. And so capitalism exists by permission of democracy. If you push people and push people and push people so that they feel like they can't afford to have their arm break once a decade or get pneumonia once a decade and survive economically, but you can fail at your cabinet job, get a hedge fund job while president of Harvard, parlay your failures deregulating the economy into a job as Obama's chief economic advisor, consort with a pedophile monster, and just expect to enjoy continued fame, glory, adulation, and resources showered on you. People at some point are going to say, enough with this whole thing. And I think that's what they are saying, and I think there's great wisdom in this feeling that people are having, and we ought to listen to it.
I think the person you made reference to the most from the 5 days of email reading you did was Larry Summers. Why is that?
Because I think Larry Summers, there was a lot of people I encountered in the emails who appeared kind of in one capacity, right? There are scientists who are dealing with Epstein, sharing science factoids, and like a lot of rich guys, he has like his little like science theories, and then he runs them by the scientists, and they share their research, and they kind of share research tidbits that like a very rich guy would like sort of, what if climate change is actually a great way to deal with overpopulation? Rich guy asides, which if you've been like locked in the bathroom at the TED conference for a few minutes, like you've heard these kind of asides and comments. But Larry Summers was one of the people who I think was most illustrative because he operated across so many kind of silos of the elite and interacted with Epstein in a lot of these different ways. So he is the intersection of the educated elite in this country. As president of Harvard, obviously fundraising, dealing with billionaires, dealing with wealthy people. He was someone who moonlighted, the New York Times reported, he moonlighted for a hedge fund while he was president of Harvard. I remember at the time thinking, what a profound story, right? You think about Harvard, hundreds of years of history. And you could just imagine the people who ran Harvard the first few hundred years would have never thought that they needed another job. That job, such a demanding job, important job, life, world-shaping job. Only in our time would someone feel like they also need to work at a hedge fund while running Harvard.
Is it the fact that he went to a hedge fund, or the fact that he had a second job, or both?
It was the fact that he felt he needed to do any other job,
Yeah.
because he was certainly being paid enough, and there were problems aplenty to think about. But it was the fact that we live in such a financialized, greed-crazed society that a man feels a need, when, you know what those jobs are like, you don't have a spare 15 minutes. You have so many things, you have so many departments that are not getting your attention, so many problems that are not getting your attention. You're finding time just to make some extra money. Again, it's not about personal blame. These little signs of our culture that you get a glimpse of a whole culture that, we live in a time in which a president of the most important university in the world didn't feel that job was enough, and that it was important also to help guide investing, to help engage in investing.
So can I share here my own personal email exchanges with Larry Summers?
Yes, can't wait.
They're not as crazy as some of the things that you read. And we consulted with the lawyers. I think it's fine for me to read these to you. And I just want to get your reaction. We tried to get Larry Summers on the show, like lots of people try to get him on their show. And so back in April, someone suggested to me that if you want Larry Summers to be on your podcast, you have to ask him directly. If you have a staff person or representative or you delegate it, he will not respond. And at the time, lots of stuff was going on with the economy and the tariffs were going on. I thought he'd be an interesting voice to have. And I wrote to him, "Dear Larry," and I wrote a long paragraph. It was very polite. The first sentence is, "I hope you were well in these tumultuous times." Talked about my podcast, which I'm sure he may or may not have been aware of, but he certainly was aware of me. I made reference to a mutual friend. It was jauntily written, I thought pretty persuasive, asking him to please consider being on the podcast. And I mentioned some other illustrious guests who had on the podcast, including in the economic field. You know what his response was?
What's that?
How many listeners do you have? Question mark. What do you make of that?
Everything. Gosh.
I drafted, while you're thinking, I drafted a response. Do you know what my draft response was? A lot more listeners than the podcast you've been going on.
Okay, but this is I love that you pulled that out, because.
But I didn't send that. That was just me being annoyed and being full of myself.
No, I don't think that was either annoyed or full of yourself.
Well, it was considered impolite.
Pretty valid.
So then, to just finish, and then I'll let you opine. So the crack team at Stay Tuned, behind the scenes, going to take down the fourth wall. So no, you can't send that one. I'm like, I don't know, you might have liked it. And they said, send an actual, polite response, and I answered the question with some facts and figures, and it's a very popular podcast, and here's why, and here's some of our download numbers, and then he responded within minutes, simply and transactionally, "I'll do it." So what do you glean as an expert at understanding human nature from the reading of emails? What do you glean from that?
Well, you said it right at the end. Transactional, which is a word we might throw around, but I think of you as someone, you and I might have differences of philosophy and perspective as we've aired in this hour, and yet I think of you as someone who you have to kind of be living under a rock to not know some of the things you've done and some of the things you stand for, to know some of the stands you've taken that permanently endangered you. You took them anyway. None of that. Let's try to do it non-judgmentally. None of what you have done in your life, Preet, like the things you've done in your life matter to me, right? And if I found out your podcast had one listener, like
you still come on.
The things you've done in your life would matter to me infinitely more than that number. You have to get into the frame of mind of a person for whom the kinds of things you've done in your life, public service, taking inconvenient stands for justice against a corrupt and dangerous president, they simply don't count a lot for someone like that, because it is about what you can do for them. And nothing you've done in your life is on its own something you can do for Larry. What can be done for Larry is only conveyed by the numbers you could offer him, the reach you could offer him. So if you take the judgment out of it any contempt I might feel for him out of it, you're getting a glimpse, sort of as the emails did for me in general with this group of people, you're getting a glimpse into how someone like that is thinking, how they're processing. And then it helps you to understand when, by the way, he was very cold to you in that email, but I've seen him emailing
Yeah,
with Jeffrey Epstein,
yeah.
a convicted sex offender. I wanna say to you, Preet, he never took that tone
It's not even the
with
tone.
a convicted sex offender.
So just the non sort of 30,000 foot level. I don't know anyone of any stature or not of stature, whatever that means, who would respond to an email like the one I sent, go from a big podcast to a small podcast, without even like one sort of general human nicety.
Yeah.
Hey, how are you? Good evening, great to hear from you. How's it going? Or sincerely, or best regards. Like even the bullshit that gets put in an email automatically by AI. Like you know, it's not the. I don't mean to overstate it about the email.
No, I think you're getting on something very important.
But I've thought, you know, and who knows? Larry Summers might be, you know, the president of the world, and you know, and deported to India
So,
because of the second chance rule on the part of the lease. But I don't care about that. Like a little thing, like you can't say thank you. You can't say you're so busy. There's so many jobs that someone, me, or one of a million people, you don't say thank you. There's no pleasantry at all.
What you're saying about the lack of kind of even just basic human interchange with you, it sounds trivial, and I want to explain to people my theory of why it is not trivial at all, okay? And so this is really important to understand. So one piece of evidence we have is like the way he's interacting with you. Another is that, you know, the thing that's gotten the most attention in the emails regarding Larry Summers is his pursuit of dating advice, extramarital dating advice, from a convicted sex offender in Jeffrey Epstein, to try to seduce this young woman, Chinese economist, apparently reportedly. And there's been a bunch of stuff around that. And it's interesting to read these, I mean, forget the kind of moral component of it that many people bring to it. It's just really interesting to see, once again, I would say the same lack of human understanding that you found in one way is also reflected in the flirtation emails. And it is really, it is almost like a 12-year-old boy, just like the skill level at talking to people, connecting with people, understanding what people mean when they say a thing. It was like a 12-year-old boy writing to a convicted sex offender. Maybe in his mind, like, sex offender, he must know a lot about sex. Like it almost felt like, I'm not joking, like.
I know, you don't want to joke, but it made me.
You know, like the way TV bookers are like working quickly, and they're like, oh yeah, he knows about that. You know, it's just like, who would know a lot about my situation with a girl? Like, oh, then maybe the sex offender. So he's emailing him. And he's asking these really 12-year-old boy level questions. Here's why I think it's actually profound for you. You're getting this evidence that someone with that, who has had that kind of power over what shape does education take in the world? What shape does the economy take? How should our regulations be structured? Who should be punished? Who should be bailed out in the wake of a financial? Someone who's really making these decisions that are all too human, that absolutely ricochet through, spread through, saturate human lives. And you're getting a glimpse of how, I don't think it's just him. I think you could, I've met Sam Altman, I would say the same about Sam Altman from OpenAI. I've met a lot of these people in different worlds of that elite. A lot of these people making these decisions that end up affecting a lot of humanity are actually some of our people with the least fluent human understanding. A lot of the people making decisions for all of society are the most socially awkward people we have. A lot of people making decisions about the future of humanity don't seem to exhibit much humanity themselves. And so your seemingly superficial point about the way he was seeing you, treating you, not seeing you, I would argue you got a glimpse of a mentality that must have been the same mentality in the room when he was deregulating the economy. Must have been the same mentality. I don't think he has another brain available to him, unless there's been some technology I don't know about. The same brain that couldn't see you as a human being in that email interaction, or that had a 12-year-old boy understanding of how to seduce someone outside of marriage, that same brain was the brain deciding whether you got a homeowner's bailout in 2008, 2009, 2010, or the banks got a bailout. That brain is the brain that is deciding in other people whether we're going to do AI this way or whether we're going to do AI in a way that is actually like better for your community. There is a kind of brain that doesn't see human beings very well, and we have somehow made the insane choice to elevate that kind of brain, the very kind of brain that emailed you and couldn't see you as a person. We have somehow chosen in so many spheres of American life to elevate that brain to being the chief deciders about the future of humanity.
Big note there. Brian Gary Dardos, thank you, sir. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your insight.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the chat.
Talk soon. Hey, folks, never miss an episode of Stay Tuned. Hit the subscribe button now.
Life doesn't wait, and neither should you. Aleve can help you deal with pain less throughout your day. Whether it's a long day on your feet, a demanding workout, or everyday aches and pains, you need relief that can keep up when pain persists. Aleve is here for you with longer-lasting body pain relief compared to leading OTC branded pain relievers. With just one pill, Aleve lasts up to 12 hours. Don't let those aches hold you back from doing what's important to you. Use as directed.
Hello, and welcome. I'm Meryl Keneally. We are D25, a radical political movement.
Thank you, guys.
This is our live
Bye.
stream with some personal ideas you won't hear anywhere